Today we're going to be showing you how you can properly set up and use a paint spray gun. We'll be showing you both a siphon and a gravity feed spray gun. Usually gravity feed or HVLP, so they'll be more efficient and you'll waste less paint and create less overspray. Siphon feed are a little simpler and a little easier to get started with sometimes, and so we'll show you both and how you set them up. Before we do get started painting, one thing that is important to know is that whether or not your compressor is sufficient for the gun you are using. Insufficient size compressor will create issues with a equal and consistent pattern, and it'll also create potential issues with not being able to break up your paint very well. So any spray gun you're considering, or if you have purchased, will usually have a manual that will show you a air requirement for that particular spray gun. So this is a Binks SV100 spray gun. You can see it asks for 6.5 to 12 CFM of air depending on the air cap you have. In just a moment here, we'll show you our air compressor, and we'll show you how you can know whether or not your compressor will be sufficient. These are general rules. Sometimes you can use a little smaller compressor if you do have a larger storage tank, but at the end of the day, your compressor will be one of the most key factors for you getting good results using your spray gun. So let's go ahead and show you our compressor. We'll show you its rating, and then we'll go ahead and show you how to get started. Alright, so this is a name plaque on a compressor. Almost any compressor out there, whatever brand it is, will have that on there. And what you're looking for is sufficient CFM. Pressure won't matter, but CFM will be what you will need to be able to spray consistently and effectively. While I mentioned the tank can help you a little bit with using a slightly smaller CFM compressor than you need, but at the end of the day, your CFM will drive your results. So check your CFM on your compressor, make sure it's more than you need, or at least equal to what your spray gun's going to need. We'll go ahead and show you how you can prepare your paint to use in the paint spray gun now. Alright, so when we're ready to get started painting, first you want to make sure you mix it properly. You can use an electric mixer if it's a thicker industrial paint, or a stir stick if it's a light to medium body paint like common house paints, or a wood finish or an automotive style paint. Those are usually okay to use in those situations. If you want to know whether or not the paint's going to be easy to spray through a gravity or a siphon feed spray gun, you can test it with a Zon 2 cup. You can get these, while there are professional ones, they're usually a couple $100. They're metal and very precise. You could get a low cost one, often for $14 or $15. And usually a Zon 2 is a perfect cup to use because most material, if it's running at 30 seconds or less in a Zon 2 cup, will allow you to spray it very easily through a gravity feed HVLP or a siphon feed gun. Thicker material may be able to spray well or spray, but you might have issues atomizing, or it might be difficult to get it to flow. In general, you want to consider the tip size that you're using with your materials. A little thicker the material, the bigger the tip you're going to need. Generally speaking, for base coats, you'll use about a 1/8 or 1/5, and then for top coats for automotive, a 1/3 is a common option. For wood finishes, you may be in the 1/2 to 1/4 range. Occasionally on large surfaces where you're trying to move fast, you might get a little higher than that. For standard industrial paints, typically you're at least at a 1.4, but generally a 1.8 or higher will be a common option you're going to be looking at. In siphon feed, you almost always need the bigger tip because of the way the gun works. So you always will need, or almost always need, at least a 1.5, but more common will be a 1.8 or higher. And in gravity, those numbers I had mentioned before will be a little more of the common. So just remember, a siphon 1.8 or higher, and then gravity feed we would be considering either usually between a 1.2 and a 1.8 for the majority of your paints. To use a Zon cup to determine how thick your paint is, what you do is you fill this cup and then you time it until the cup stops having an equal, even stream. And when that stream starts to sputter, then you would stop your timer and decide how long it's taken. Now, this material is on the thicker side, but we'll go ahead and show you what it'll spray like. One thing you'll also want to consider is filtering your paint. You can do that pretty easily prior to putting it in your cup, whether it's a gravity or siphon fed spray gun. particularly if you're doing an automotive finish or a very fine finish, filtering your paint prior to putting it in your spray gun could be very critical. But most of the time for an industrial painting or wood finishes, it's not as always much of a need. So we'll go ahead and show you what this is going to spray like. A little less thin than it may need to be. We'll get you started to show you what that'll look like. To get started, all we need to do is open up your cup and pour it in and connect your gun to your air supply. So we'll fill this up, and then I'll fill up my gravity gun, and I will show you both to show you whether or not you know the material's thin enough or properly set up. The same principles would apply if this was a turbine sprayer. It's going to work pretty much the same way as what we're using, except you have a turbine to break up and provide air, so you won't need to worry about your compressor like we just had to prior to starting here. Alright, so at this point I've put material in. This is unthinned. When it comes to the spray gun, depending on what kind you have, most will have a few common features though. The top is your air shaping pattern. What this allows for is you to open and close the size of your air pattern depending on what you're spraying. Now, a couple things to note: if you are using a more professional spray gun, they will often have different air caps, which can also control how big of a pattern or fan you're having, and then they'll have different tip sizes. So if you find you're not getting enough paint, then you would want to consider a bigger tip on your spray gun, and that would help you put more paint in the same pattern. Generally, you would know if you're not getting enough paint because it's going to look very rough, or when you spray, it's going to look very textured because of the extra air being pushed into too little paint. If your paint's running as you're spraying, then you probably have too big of a tip, and if it's not spraying at all with the siphon or gravity, then your tip's probably is too small to allow for the material to flow in the gravity gun or for it to siphon well out of the siphon gun. On a siphon gun, you also want to make sure your air cap is a siphon gun. Most siphon guns can also be used on a pressure pot, so the S series on a cap will generally say it is meant for siphoning. If you find your cap doesn't have an S on it, at least in the Binks and DeVilbiss series of equipment, then you wouldn't have a siphon cap and you wouldn't be able to siphon the material. So those are a few things to check prior to you getting ready. This is your fluid needle adjustment knob. Again, that'll let you control the needle and how far up it sits. So the further down we cheat this needle, the more material we restrict at the tip of the gun. Generally, you want to start with it relatively wide open, and then you can slowly adjust in if you need to for smaller areas that you may be doing. But generally, we start with it wide open to tune in and to get the gun ready for whatever we may be painting. So I have my part here. I haven't done a lot to prep it, didn't necessarily do a full solvent wipe of it, but what we're going to look for, and this would be what you would be doing using any spray gun, is to start your test spray to see if you're happy with the level of atomization you're getting and the overall pattern. This is an area I just finished on this part. It's fairly well done. It is a little bit rougher, a little more air sprayed than I would want. My pressure on my air is up pretty high, so I'm at about 30 pounds. You can go as high as you want on the conventional style siphon gun. On an HVLP, they usually will have a number on the cap that they suggest for the maximum pressure that you would be using that gun for to really get the results as far as the efficiency goes. So you can see on my cap it says 24 pounds, which means it doesn't recommend more than 24 pounds at my gun base when I'm pulling my trigger. So this is currently set to be at about 30 pounds. So on the HVLP, this is a little more than I would want, which I'm going to show without thinning this material, which is Sherwin-Williams Pro Classic. We wouldn't be spraying this quite as efficiently as if we would go ahead and thin it slightly. On the conventional siphon feed gun, all we do is we can increase pressure. You generally almost always need to leave the needle and open on this. You can choke it down a little, but siphon feed needs that opened nozzle to allow material to draw well. You basically, on this, you'll be just increasing air pressure until you start noticing material flow when you're spraying. And again, if you aren't happy with the pattern or you aren't getting enough material, that might be an indication that you don't have a large enough fluid tip on there, your air cap isn't a siphon cap, or your compressor is insufficient. You would usually notice that by hearing your compressor constantly running. We also have set up an air-water filtration system, usually you do want to consider at the very least a 2-stage water system, or at least an inline desiccant filter that can be attached at the base of your gun. Moisture in the air to your spray gun will create issues with your finish, like solvent pops and similar problems. All right, so after you've dialed in your spray gun, the next thing you want to do is your technique. In general, you want to be about 4 to 6 inches from the surface, and then as you're spraying, you want to move in a up and down motion. You don't want to use your wrist, as that creates uneven distance from the surface and can alter the way your spray will look. All right, so about 4 to 6 inches, and then you want to stay about the same distance away. And you can trigger on and off as you get to the edges of the surface, and then if you needed to dial in here, you can make your fine-tuning adjustments. These are really meant for just controlling pattern more so than how the material is breaking up. That'd be most of your adjustments are done there, changing fluid sizes, nozzle sizes, air cap types, or thinning material. So you do want to make sure you get a relatively even amount of paint on all the areas. And then that'll be mostly all there is to using a spray gun. Too far away, you won't get a good coverage, or you'll get very textured spraying. Too close, you'll get a lot of excess runs. So that's some practical tips on actually using the spray gun. You also want to always wear the proper respirator. In this case, we're not going to, so we can continue to do some instruction while I am spraying. This is a water-based paint, so it's relatively low in any VOCs. But as I spray, you can see from my test that it's a relatively smooth-looking finish, so I could sufficiently say that I could use this like it is already. Now, if I choke down my air pattern, as you'll see, it's going to get a tighter spray, tighter space, and smaller in size. That's helpful when you're doing corners or edges and you don't want to have the paint going all different ways in large direction. It gives you some fine-tuning ability. Now you do see, because of the siphon feed, it's a little harder to do this because of the fact that I need that opening a little larger to really get good material flow and get the air pulling across the top of the material for siphon. All right, so with that setup, we know we're okay. I could spray the rest of this product and be relatively happy. You could thin this slightly to get you closer to 30 seconds in the zone. That's just you're gonna know right out the gate that that'll spray well with an HVLP. We'll go ahead and show you a little bit of orange peel as well. We'll show you the gravity gun and how that will differ slightly. The gravity gun relative to the siphon gun has a lot more control of your air pattern and your needle, so it is a little more effective to really control how you're spraying easily. So that is how you use a spray gun. We will show you here what orange peel looks like and how you would know. If you do get orange peel, there's two things you can do. You can increase air pressure, or you can reduce the material to be thinner. For reference, this gun though, if I bring down my pressure to 20 pounds, which is HVLP, so when I come in here, that's becoming too chunky. And so why that's happening is I don't have enough air pressure or I have too much paint. Now, knowing I'm using a 1.4, that's a middle of the road tip. I wouldn't generally try to use a smaller tip with this particular paint. This is a medium viscosity paint, so I would generally think a 1.4 is good. You can also use the tech data sheet, which we'll show you in a second, because on there they're going to have a recommended tip size, especially for a professional style spray gun. And so with that tip size, you can better determine if you're in the right range. But you can see that's a little too chunky. So in my case, I need to either increase my air pressure to help break up those paint particles further, or decrease my fluid nozzle so there's less material, or thin it slightly. That being said, if I had runs, then I would need to consider a smaller fluid tip to give me less paint in the same area. So we'll go ahead. At this point, this was shooting HVLP because my pressure was low. To actually get this material to break up, I have to increase it where it's actually getting a little less efficiency as far as how it's spraying. And you can see I'm creating a little more overspray as I'm doing that. But as a result, I get the smooth finish again. So orange peel looks like very chunkier or larger dots relative to a good finish, which as sprayed is going to look a lot finer as the particles go on. So those are some things to look at when you're starting to spray. If you notice orange peel, remember you need more air in a smaller amount of paint or a thinner amount of paint. So you either drop a tip size, increase air pressure, or thin your paint. If you're getting runs, you try to consider a smaller tip size as you're getting too much paint in the pattern. Alright, so as I mentioned, prior to you spraying your product, you can check for a tip size recommendation as well as the spray gun type. So as you notice there, it says conventional. Generally, if it says conventional, that's going to mean they want a pressure pot, as they give you a fluid pressure, which means it would need a pressure pot. However, they also give you a tip size, which is an E. You can look on the part sheet for the size. I know on that particular piece of equipment an E is a 1.8 millimeter tip. So that'll give you an idea if you're in the right range, or you can use those reference ranges I gave you earlier. But knowing the right tip size will give you a good starting point, and then we'll go ahead and show you how to clean up the equipment. So when we're all done with our job and we're all finished, to clean up, there's a couple things you'll do. First, you'll dump the remaining paint back in your can. Then we'll be running water through the gun until it's clear. And at that point, we can be relatively finished with getting our gun cleaned up from our work. So you always want to dump the paint back unless you've mixed it or it's a paint that's going to harden on you. Then you'd throw this away because you can't reuse it. This paint is reusable, so I'll go ahead and take advantage of that by saving the paint. And the same thing with the gravity, we're going to empty the cup. Then we're just going to run water through it. We'll also clean up our cup by removing whatever paint's left. You do dispose of the water in there. Alright, so final steps to cleaning after you've gone ahead and cleaned out the cup. You can do one of two things. You always want to put your air cap in water and make sure it's clean. You can disassemble the gun, pulling out the fluid needle and the nozzle. If you're going to leave it for a longer period of time, that would be the ideal cleaning option. If you're just going to be leaving this overnight or a couple days in between uses, then you can just run water through the tip and make sure it's blowing out clear water. And at that point, you should be relatively situated and it wouldn't have an issue. So if you have any concerns, you're always going to want to go ahead and break the gun down completely. Otherwise, just blow water through till you're clear. And at that point, it should be clean enough to go ahead and finish up. Thank you for watching this video on how to use a paint spray gun. If you need recommendations on a spray gun that's best for your particular need, given your compressor and a variety of factors, you can leave us a message below, visit us on our site, or if you have any other questions about spraying paint, leave them in the comments below. Thanks for watching.